I didn't have to go off chasing what I was chasing any longer because I understood why I was doing it. There was, instead of running a wrong motion, which are driven by our inner child, now we grow up and we become more emotionally mature.
Welcome to What We Really Want, conversations about connection. Settle in and get ready for a great conversation. Let's talk about what we really want.
Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of What We Really Want. This is episode 38. Our guest today is Dr. Eddie Capparucci, and this episode's called Going Deeper with Your Inner Child. It's a little bit more descriptive than our average episode title, and I did that for a specific reason. That is because this is a concept that I have found to be very, very helpful as I've gotten to know Eddie over the past 4 or 5 years and have read what he's written about inner child therapy and how that impacts some of the struggles that we go through in life. I've just found it to be a very helpful way of coming to understand and giving language to what's going on internally. It's been really helpful for me, understanding some of my own story, getting to know how inner child work can really help in the recovery process. And another reason why I wanted to be pretty direct with the title is because if I'm being honest, I think over the course of my life, when I have heard people talking about inner child work, there was a time when a part of me internally would just kind of be rolling my eyes like, oh, here we go. You know, we're going to be talking to our inner child. We're going to be figuring out what went wrong in my childhood. And I just didn't understand yet how significant and how impactful those parts of my life were, those early childhood experiences, those adverse childhood experiences that everybody goes through, some worse than others, and how there are parts of us that just kind of get stuck and frozen in the experiences that were associated with that trauma. And so as I got into recovery and realized that my past had such a great impact on my present, then I began to look back on things that I may have scoffed at one point with a great deal more curiosity, realizing that there was something very valuable for me to learn from it. Eddie is a therapist. He has a practice called Abundant Life Counseling with he and his wife, Teri. His therapy practice is probably the closest thing to his heart, but this writing that he has been doing over the past several years on coming to understand the inner child's impact on current struggles has really been something that has resonated with people all over the world. He's written a book called Going Deeper, How the Inner Child Impacts Your Sexual Addiction. That was the book that probably most people took notice of when it came out several years ago. Since then, he has written more books on the inner child model that he has developed. Most recently, Eddie and his wife, Teri, have written a book called Going Deeper for Betrayed Partners, Discovering Healing Through Your Inner Child. And so it's taking the inner child model and not only exploring how it connects to addiction, but also the difficult and the painful process of coming back from betrayal trauma and some of the unresolved wounds that make that process even harder. It's just very, very helpful. I really enjoyed my conversation with Eddie. He is not only a compassionate, but a very passionate person in how he talks about this, and I know that that'll come through as you listen. Here it is, episode 38. It's called Going Deeper with Your Inner Child with Eddie Capparucci, and the episode starts right now. Eddie Capparucci, thanks for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you.
We first tried to record this episode 10 months ago, and you were going to be one of the first episodes that I released. But the audio, I had a lot of trouble with it. It just wasn't going to sound good. And so I got with you and you said, yeah, let's re-record it. And then we had to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. So now I was thinking at the end of last year, man, who am I going to get for 2025? And I was so excited, like, well, I got Eddie because Eddie's coming back. So I'm excited finally to get something out there that our listeners can hear.
Well, thank you. I mean, hey, I was like one of the guinea pigs at the beginning, and, trial and error. That's the way things work out. But, I'm glad that everything's going well. I'm glad that the podcast, off and running. And I'm sure people are just walking away with a wealth of information.
Well, that's the hope. The hope is that people, through listening to this, are going to be able to catch a vision for what healthy connection could look like. And people who don't even know how to envision that for themselves would get an idea of how they can pursue it just by listening like flies on the wall when you and I talk. So I asked you this the last time. I'm going to ask you again, Eddie. What do you really want out of our conversation today?
Well, what I want is that you and I, that we engage in a dialogue that's actually going to be very meaningful. We go down to the roots. You know me, going deeper. That's the way I go. Go down to the roots so that we get people to really start to, understand the importance of self-reflection so that they can, get to the core of what's troubling them versus the normal, oh, let's put a Band-Aid on this. Let's, try to just clean this up a little bit, because there can really be some really healthy changes done when you do that self-reflection. So that's what I'm hoping to get out of this today.
I love it. You talk about going deeper in several of your books. Our intensives are called the Roots Retreat because it's all about getting under the surface, isn't it?
That's exactly what it's about. It's about understanding and answering the question, why? Why do I think, feel, and do the things I do? Mm-hmm. And as you mentioned, we started off with the book for the men who struggle with problematic sexual behavior. We then moved to a book for all different types of addictive behaviors. Then we went to the women who struggle with sex and love addiction. And now we come out with the latest book, and that is for the betrayed partner. So this thing is taking on many legs, as you can see. And I still get people who are saying to me, hey, wait a second, how come we're not using it for depression and anxiety? And as I tell them all the time, I say, you know what? You probably can. I just don't have all the data to be able to do that. Along the way, I've been able to gain data by collaborating with others who have used the model in different client populations. Because again, I don't want to just put something out there because I say, well, I think it'll work. I want to make sure, I want people to have documented case studies. So,
and it just occurs to me that taking the time for that self-reflection and coming to a place of deeper understanding of our stories and how the events of our lives affected us and getting some healing from that will have positive impact on anything else that we're struggling with, be it depression, anxiety. I'm not saying it's going to cure it because, a lot of those conditions, they're beyond our control and we need other types of help and interventions and medicines for that. But to have that peace, that understanding can do nothing but help.
Agreed. I fully agree with you. And I know even as I've thought about it that, how many of my own clients have dealt with things such as not just their problematic sexual behavior, but with anxiety or depression. And yet they saw, changes there that were very positive.
Well, I'm excited to talk in a little bit about the most recent book that you and your wife, Teri, co-authored together, because when we last talked, that was still in process and you were anticipating its release.
It came out in December.
Okay.
It's doing extremely well. And now we're in the process of putting together training for clinicians on how to be able to deliver that to that particular audience.
That's terrific. I want to remind us, and people listening will hear it for the first time, you and I met through a connection that we both have with Drew Boa, who has been on the show, is the founder of a community called Husband Material. You and I worked together on a virtual retreat a few years back where you were the keynote speaker and I led one of the small groups. So I got to know you a little bit there. Mm-hmm. And so I've had the pleasure and the privilege of getting to know you a little bit. Would you help everybody else get to know you? And I'm really curious about how you came to do what you do now.
Well, that's a story for a show by itself, right? But I'll try to keep it as concise as possible. I went through my own issues in this area, which cost me a couple of marriages. And finally, when I was about almost 40 years old and I'd hit rock bottom, and I said, I got to go get some help. I need to figure out what this is about. So I went to a psychologist, and what she diagnosed me with was an attachment disorder, which I had no idea what that was because I was in corporate America. I was a marketing and advertising guy. And she said, you have a fear of abandonment. So therefore, you always have one foot in and one foot out of every relationship. And that made perfect sense based on what my acting out was involved in. Well, fast forward, I met my wife, my current wife, Teri. And, I explained everything to her, told her the whole story. And she said, you know what, I think I'll take a chance with you. And so now we've been together 30 years.
Wow.
And been faithful the entire time. Shouldn't have to brag about that, but it's just the truth of what it is. But what happened with Teri, she pushed me a little bit to say, hey, if I would really love to have our home be more spiritual. So that's what we did. We went to a church and got very active, very involved in it. And along the way, after several years, I felt God calling me to do something different, to walk away from corporate America. Didn't like that idea at all. Fought him for a while. And finally, I yielded and gave in. And of course, it was to go be a Christian counselor. So I went back to school, got another master's degree, did all the state work, became licensed, and opened up a practice. After a short period of time, these guys start walking in the door, and I'm like, oh my God, they look like I did, 10 years ago or 5 years ago. What the heck? And then it dawned on me, that's what he wanted me to do. So I went back and I did more certifications in all the various different areas. And the rest of it has been history. The one thing he did tell me very early on was stay in the trenches. And I do. My private practice is first and foremost. That's where I stay. And then occasionally we'll wander out and do a little bit of stuff here and there.
And I know there are a lot of people that I rub shoulders with who are glad that you do. Several years ago, I can't remember how I first became aware of it, but I somehow happened upon your book, Going Deeper, How the Inner Child Impacts Your Sexual Addiction. And I know you've written 6, but that has kind of been your, I don't want to reduce it, but your bread and butter. I mean, that's where you do so much of your work, is on helping people understand the impact of their inner child experience. And, people hear talk about, your inner child and this is going on and it's activated, but a lot of people don't really know very much about what is meant by that. And so I know that you talk about, and this is a quote from your website, at the heart of most problematic sexual behaviors are unresolved childhood pain points. And I know that you've taken those pain points and you've basically kind of given them personas, identities, in the form of these inner children from your book. And I'd love for you to tell us about that and just why coming to understand the impact on our inner child is so critical in understanding not only how the brokenness has manifested, but how we can really get on a path to healing.
Agreed. And you set that up very, very well. I am a big believer, again, in the why question. Why do I think, feel, and do what I do? Because just like with my experience, once I realized why I was doing what I did, it gave me such great power to make real substantial changes in my life. I didn't have to go off chasing what I was chasing any longer because I understood why I was doing it. Instead of running a wrong motion, which are driven by our inner child, now we grow up and we become more emotionally mature. So going back to what you said before, the original book, what it looked at was 9 of what I thought were the most common childhood pain points that someone would suffer. We've since then expanded it to 12. But each of those children, what they do is they represent that emotional distress that a person had to go through by themselves. But that's the real trauma. Mm-hmm. Think about it. There's nobody there. So, for example, the unnoticed child, the unaffirmed child. And what people do as they go through the inner child process, they walk through each of these kids and what are their attributes, what transpired conspire to get them to where they are. And then they select the one that they resonate most with them. And with that also, each of these children also have core emotional triggers. And there's many types of triggers that are out there. Okay, there's environmental triggers, there's visual triggers. But I believe emotional triggers are the most powerful ones that we experience. So therefore, what you're doing is once you identify a child, each one has its own core emotional trigger. You're then going to select those triggers that sting you the most. Okay, wait a second. My inner child is activated. Because when he becomes activated because of an event that happens in your life that he looks at and says, wow, this matches up with something we've experienced before. What it does, it increases your anxiety level tremendously. And as children, because no one was there to teach us what to do with our emotional pain and distress, we came up with our own coping strategy. And it's a brilliant one. I won't think about it. And how do you do that? Well, too much television, too much food, too much sugar, too much fantasy, not sexual fantasy, but just fantasy about how important I am, how talented I am, things like that. So the inner child model slows everything down. It gives you the awareness and the insight you need so that when you get activated by a negative event and your child gets activated, your stress level doesn't go through the roof and then you run away. Instead, you're able to use rational thinking to be able to think it through and bring it down to a level where you can manage it effectively.
I have a question about that. That makes total sense to me. I've been doing this work and in it myself for 16 years. And so I've done a lot of work. I've come to a lot of realizations. I've done a lot of study and research and reading. But what you just have been talking about is going to be news to a lot of people who are struggling, because especially people who struggle with unwanted sexual behavior, the headline is, this has got to have something to do with being just aroused all the time, or I'm oversexed, or I just am too horny or whatever. And it's not that. What you're describing is it's about arousal for sure, but it's emotional arousal. And,
Correct.
And those emotional triggers that are connected with pain. And we've learned pain sucks. I don't like pain. And so I'm going to get as far away from pain as I can. And you know what makes me forget about pain is something pleasurable. And I mean, doesn't it go back to, the using something physical to self-soothe, to escape discomfort? I mean, that goes all the way back to infants and babies sucking their thumbs, doesn't it?
It does, absolutely. And like you said, that you're trained that way. And parents are supposed to be there to help us to be able to say, hey, guess what? You don't need to suck on your thumb. You can share with me your distress, your discomfort, and I will help to soothe you. Mm-hmm. Okay? And then teach them how to soothe themselves. Those who struggle with addiction, and I'm talking about all types of addiction, we don't know how to soothe other than numb or seek stimulation. Mm-hmm. Because what we're doing, we're just trying to escape. If you look at the inner child model, it's teaching people, no, you can sit with the pain, it will not kill you. And you can, in fact, what you're going to do is you're going to learn and you're going to grow from sitting with that pain. You're going to become a stronger individual, stronger than you've ever become.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but that's not any fun.
You know what? I mean, you don't like to sit in pain now. I don't like to sit in pain now. But we have come to the understanding that in doing so, there is a benefit to it. Mm-hmm. It also takes away the destructive behaviors that we were doing before, which in itself is a benefit.
We'll be right back.
How have things gotten so out of control? How did something that didn't seem like such a big deal at first completely take over? Porn and sex addiction are destroying your life and killing your relationships. You know you can't keep going on like this, keeping secrets and telling lies. Something has to change. But how? Most men who struggle with unwanted or addictive sexual behavior have tried to fix it on their own. But sex addiction is powerful and complicated. Recovery is possible, but it isn't easy. It requires us to focus on more than just behavior. It requires us to look at our whole lives and the parts of our stories that contribute to addiction. If you're ready to find freedom, maybe it's time for you to get to the roots. The Roots Retreat is a 4-day therapeutic and spiritual intensive. You'll work with therapists and coaches who specialize in sex addiction and recovery. You'll learn how to take healthy ownership of your behavior. You'll discover how your life experiences set the stage for addiction to develop. You'll see how God factors into your struggle, and you'll learn effective tools for ongoing recovery after the retreat. If you're ready to stop trying what doesn't work, if you're ready to experience real hope, healing, and change, let's get to the roots.
Visit awakenrecovery.com/Roots Retreat or click the Roots Retreat link in show notes. Yeah, for sure. So when you're working with men who are clients and you're beginning to introduce them to this way of processing their experiences, I'm just interested, do you, and if you do, how often do you get pushback from them? Like, is it hard for them to accept an approach that looks on their current experience with curiosity and kindness? You're nodding. You probably get where I'm going. So many of us just filter our own experience through such a heavy shame filter that it's characterological. We're doing this because we're a terrible person. And it's almost like we come to therapy looking for somebody to just confirm our bias. But when you get curious instead and say, there are reasons why you've turned to this and it's gotten out of control, and instead of saying shame on you, you say, well, of course, do you have people that want to fight you on that and just stay in their shame?
A lot of these folks, they live in a negative comfort zone. They live in this area where they have a strong negative affect. They see the glass half empty instead of half full. Mm-hmm. They'll find something wrong with everything. You can come to them with the best news and they'll be, yeah, but. So that's part of what goes on here. So even when you're telling them and say, hey, you know what? It's not that you're a pervert or overset. What you have is you're dealing with the inability to sit with emotional discomfort, and you have an emotional intimacy disorder. That's what this is all about. But they are so burdened by what they've done that it sometimes takes time. So therefore, you're going to get the pushback. Yeah, but I had a great childhood. There was nothing wrong with my childhood. My parents were wonderful. All of that. And I'm actually thinking about one of my clients now who's been with me for about 4 years. He's been sober the whole entire time. But I remember when he first came, he was saying those same words. And he was a little bit older and he was a bit of a struggle. But after about 3 months, he came in one day and said, you know what? This is all starting to click. He goes, I was conditioned to be the man I was. And I'm not happy with the man I am, and I want change.
What you were just mentioning about that client is really, it's sparking something in me right now, Eddie, because I was having a conversation actually earlier today with some church leaders who are trying to kind of train up their staff to do a better job of being there and responding to and walking with people whose sexual brokenness gets exposed in the church, which is wonderful. Anytime you get pastors who want to do a great job with that. But, and we were talking about the link between trauma and addiction. And, you know, there are categories of trauma. You know, there's abuse, overt abuse, there's abandonment, there's rejection. And some of the 12 characters in going deeper are pictures of more of those overt experiences. But, you know, something that probably overlaps with almost all of them, if not all of them, is the hardest one, I think, and probably the most universal, which is neglect. You know, because abuse, abandonment, rejection, that's all something happened that shouldn't have happened, and I can point at it. But neglect is, I should have had this and I didn't. How many people who say, I had a great childhood, that's just because that was the only thing that they knew. And when they become aware of these needs that we actually had for attunement and responsiveness and, the helping us to learn how to regulate our emotion, and they realize they didn't have that, it kind of comes rushing in.
Then you have to pull them down off the ceiling, because then what they do is they get into this conflict where it's like part of them are angry at their parent, and another part of them is like, oh my God, I'm vilifying them. I don't want to do that. And as I say to them, I go, no, you're absolutely right. We're not laying blame at the feet of parents, especially when it comes to neglect. Abuse, something different, but neglect, because there are a lot of good people who they emotionally neglected their kids. So why? Because they were emotionally neglected.
That's right.
You have to remember, this is a very generational type of disorder that plays out. They don't want to look at their parents as bad people. And as I said to them, they weren't bad people. They were good people. They just didn't have the skill that you needed.
Well, Jay Stringer puts it extraordinarily well in Unwanted when he talks about holding space for both honor and honesty. We can honor our parents while still being honest about the fact that maybe the best that they had was less than we needed. And, I used to really bristle when people said, well, they were just doing the best they could, because I would want to say, oh, no, they weren't. But actually, they probably were, because this is an issue of capacity.
True, because you got to remember, there's a lot of other things that are involved. Like, for example, maybe you're one of 7 kids, okay? Or perhaps maybe you have some siblings that are special needs or have some sort of disability. Maybe there's a lot of financial worries and issues that go on in the home. So see, there's many other factors that could be pulling a parent away from being able to devote the time and energy. This is the biggest problem I find with all of this. When the people start to do the inner child work, they'll say, yeah, my father never told me he loved me, and my father he just wasn't around. But, I know how much he worked. He had to support the family, and what they're trying to do, give them an out. We're going to give them the out later, not now. But when I think about it, it doesn't really hurt that much. I think it was rather silly that I was upset. I go, okay, that's the adult talking. Now go back to when you were 6 years old. Did it not hurt?
Mm-hmm.
Was it silly to you then that dad was just ignoring you? And all of a sudden you get a very different answer and approach.
And the adult words for talking themselves down, what I imagine they don't know they're doing at the time, is they are kind of neglecting their own inner child. I mean, the inner child who is screaming for attention, they're trying to rationalize and reason with and talk logically to an activated little kid. And you just can't do that. No,
you can't. You can't. Well, one thing we just want to talk to our kid about is to say, hey, you know what? You're not alone anymore. There's an adult here. I'm going to be able to handle it my way.
I loved the first time that I read Going Deeper, and just the imagery of like when the kid is activated by one of these core emotional triggers. And it's like if you and younger you were standing there and the kid starts screaming like, give me the keys, I'm going to drive. Give me the keys, I'm going to drive the car. And a healthy adult will say, I understand you're upset, and I understand this is what you've always done, but it wouldn't be good for me to let you drive, But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pull you close to me. I'm going to sit you next to me, and I'm going to show you how I'm going to acknowledge what happened, but we have options that we didn't have before. I know I'm wildly paraphrasing what you talk about, but that was just such a helpful imagery for me to say, like, it makes sense that the kid's screaming, and they don't need a lecture, and they don't need to be ignored. They need to be held and comforted and seen, and then they need to see that we can take care of things that we didn't have the capacity for.
Imagery and word pictures are so beneficial when you're doing this type of work. To have people be able to kind of put things and visualize. That's why a lot of times what I'll do is I'll have them draw a picture of their inner child. What he looked like back then. And again, almost every time you get to see sad. Some of them go more with the angry, but I never see anybody where a kid who's got a balloon in his hand and he's smiling from ear to ear. That's not it. That's not what they draw. So, but to be able to do that really very beneficial for them. But it helped them to get engaged and get connected, because there's a bit of a misconception among some people that the inner child is like a separate individual within us. And I said, no. We're not schizophrenic here. This is not schizophrenia that we're talking about, okay? The inner child is a metaphor for the younger you and the pain you went through by yourself. And once you explain that to them, then they're like, oh, that makes perfect sense.
Well, and the last time we talked, you and I talked for a little while just about the similarities and the complementary way that inner child work and, say, a modality like IFS or internal family systems can work, different ways of saying similar things. But what you're describing, anybody who's watched Inside Out or Inside Out 2,
yes,
that's what you're talking about. It's not schizophrenia. It's just the different parts of ourselves.
That's exactly, you know what? Inside Out, the perfect representation. I just loved it. So powerful. And it's a wonderful visual, it's a wonderful word picture to give you insight of what went on in that little girl's head. That confusion, which she wasn't sharing. But when she did go and share with her mother and her father, things were very different for her.
I want to shift a little bit because I want to talk about the most recent book that you and Teri wrote. I'm going to go back to something you said way earlier when you were introducing yourself. You talked about your own addictive struggles early on and how that contributed to the destruction of a couple of marriages. But then you talked about when you and Teri were starting to come together as a couple, you just told her everything. You were already doing your work. I think that's important because in our community, all of the men that I interact with who are coming into our men's recovery community over the years, and it's coming up on 10 years since we started. Since we started in 2015, the average age of the men who are coming in keeps getting lower and lower, which has a sad element to it because that means they started getting addicted to porn much younger, and it got to a point where it was out of control when they were still very young men. But the plus side of that is we're getting so many men who are coming to get help when they were in their early 20s, when they're still single. They have not dragged this into a marriage yet. So talk a little bit about what it's like to be able to work with men who have not had this, bring that kind of destruction into their relationships to that scale yet, and how that is for you as a therapist.
Well, I mean, just like you are, I mean, like you said, I could sense this excitement in you, knowing that the men are coming to get help. It's really refreshing to see the younger people who come to understand and be able to say, you know what, if I take this into my marriage, what I'm doing is I'm creating a potential problem. Before, we weren't giving it that thought. And what that tells me is those guys, they're more emotionally attuned than the older, like guys like me, the older ones are. And the fact that they're more emotionally, attuned to what needs to be done in a healthy relationship is what's driving them to come and get help now. So again, I like you said, it's bittersweet. It's a double-edged sword. The idea that, we wish they didn't have to be there in the first place. But the fact that they're seeking help at such a young age and before they get married, it's a testimony to them.
Yeah. And also, there are plenty of men who don't ask for help until after it's already, had some destruction, some devastation in their marriage. When you interact with these guys who are doing this work, coming to understand themselves better, they are doing it alongside a partner who is going through PTSD. And is often very reactionary, and which amplifies, it probably pulls up a lot of those emotional triggers for them, which makes it difficult for them to do that work. We have talked before about the necessity of this work as preparation. for existing in an ongoing relationship that's trying to heal when you've got a partner who's going through her own wounding. Talk to me a little bit about resilience building.
Well, I love what you just said, though. The idea that when a woman is going through her grieving period, these men are getting triggered themselves. Their inner child being triggered. Mm-hmm. Oh my God, this reminds me of the mother I had. It reminds me of the sister who would verbally abuse me. And so therefore, we're trying to get these guys to stay calm, and we're trying to get them to engage, but at the same time, they're scared to death. And so therefore, there has to be more that's done in this area so that people can understand. I know people are like, whoa, wait a second. We're not talking about the guys over here. We're talking about the women who are hurting. I understand. But don't we want to try to make this as seamless as possible? And if you're not going to be able to do that, if you neglect the fact that you have somebody over here who's being emotionally dysregulated, and all we're supposed to do is tell him, you're not supposed to be emotionally dysregulated. Stop it. I mean, think about what is that? That's like what his parents were doing to him when he was younger. So there's going to have to be some sort of a movement in that direction to be able to, again, what are we trying to accomplish here? We're trying to accomplish healing and restoration.
But since he doesn't have any control over the timing or his partner's willingness to engage in that, how do you help him build his own resilience while he's waiting, to see some of that participation from his partner?
It is through his own work that he needs to do. The fact that he is becoming transformed. Mm-hmm. He is becoming a new creation. That is where he needs to put his effort, his energy, and more importantly, his mindset. Because what I want him to do is to start to build confidence. That, when she's ready, I will be able to love her unlike I've ever loved her before when she's ready. And therefore, you're right, there are going to be times in the process that they're continuing to do this, that they're going to get a little frustrated. But as I tell them, I go, you know what? Your number one tool you need is patience. Because a lot of times we've seen it where the man has gone to do the work, and the woman's like, no, I'm not doing it. I don't have the problem. It's not mine. He has to do it. I'm not doing it. I get it. I understand. And so then they start 6 months, a year, 18 months later, they begin. Mm-hmm. He's already into the process. He's like, hey, honey, look at me. Look how different I am. And she's like, are you kidding me? I'm sitting here bleeding. And he's like, yeah, I know, but I'm ready. And she's like, I'm not. And so now she has to begin. So again, that's where I have to instill in him once again. The idea we need patience, the fruit of the Spirit, to be able to be ready, be prepared to love her when she's ready.
It occurs to me that it's not just about the actions that he's taking, but it's also about what's motivating those actions too. Because if you're doing the work to try to get your partner to settle down, you're not getting what you need personally out of it, and you have no control over whether she settles down. But so often we have found that when a betrayed, wounded, hurt partner sees her husband doing the work and sees the consistency, things do settle down. And
that's the word, consistency.
Yeah. And he didn't make it happen, but he contributed to her safety. He helped her get to a point where she could feel like things were not, on shaky ground so much anymore. And she's able now to choose to engage, like you were talking about.
How many men are like, well, what can I do to regulate her? You can't do anything to regulate her. What you can do, if you're not careful, is you can make it worse.
Yes.
You could throw fuel onto that fire. And that's what we don't want to do. So therefore, it's like, make sure, look to the pain point, validate what's going on, and be curious. Mm-hmm. Ask questions. Show engagement. That's what you can do at this point in time. You're limited.
Well, and we talked before about how critical it is in the couple's healing process for the betrayed partner to do their own healing inner child work, because in doing so, I mean, first of all, they're just coming to the couple's work from a healthier, more grounded, and more stable position. But in doing a similar type of work that their partner's been doing, that even I would imagine, I mean, one way to put it would be it gives them the capacity to even have empathy for what their partner went through and say, they didn't do this to intentionally hurt me. In most cases, I mean, you got some cases where you got a narcissist and they're really, vengeful or spiteful. But in most cases, yes, it annihilated you, but that was not his intention to do that. Right. And so to be able to understand that, I mean, I'm guessing that was one of the key motivations for you guys writing this most recent book.
Well, actually, the key motivation for writing the first book, I wanted the partners who've been hurt to see, oh, so wait a second, he didn't do this intentionally. No, he broke in also. So that was part of what that was. Here, in this case, with this book also, the thing about a betrayed partner doing her work, her inner child work, we have to make sure that the timing is correct. This is not for a woman who just experienced D-Day. Mm-hmm. Okay, we're not bringing her into the office and saying, okay, well, we're going to start working you on your inner child. Okay, she had to be focused on her grieving. She had to understand what is betrayal trauma. She had to start to understand what is he doing to do his work. There's all that processing that had to go on. The reason for this book, Greg, was Teri and I have become so disillusioned and heartbroken that we see so many women who are still in the betrayal trauma process 5, 10, 15, 30 years later. And as Teri and I have done this work, because I work with women who've been betrayed, Teri does what she does exclusively, and she brought this model in. What it does is let women see that, whoa, wait a second, you know what? I'm not just grieving, or I'm not just troubled right now by what he's done to me. There's something in my past that is being dragged into this, which is magnifying this pain that I have.
What he's doing now has just stepped on an already exposed nerve.
Exactly. But that nerve might have been not touched for a long, long, long time, but now it's there, but they're not aware of it. So they're looking at all of the pain and they're just focused all on what he has done. So therefore, we need to take these two worlds that collided and we have to separate them. Here's the problem here that we're dealing with. Okay, a father who ignored you when you were a little girl, or maybe, a brother who was very abusive to you when you were a little girl, or parents who might have divorced. Or one parent who might have been an alcoholic, an abandonment, whatever it may have been. Okay, there's many, there's 10. We have 10 children for the betrayed partner. And therefore, we have to take those two worlds, and we have to pull them apart, process some of the pain from the past, so that what she's left with is the pain that he caused her, which she's going to find lowers her anxiety tremendously. Not to say she's not going to get dysregulated from time to time, but she'll be able to regulate herself much quicker. And therefore, you know what that all means? She feels better about herself. How many times have we heard women say, I've lost myself. I don't know who I am. I hate what I do when I get like this. And it's so sad. So therefore, guess what? We're going to give you the tools so that you're going to feel better about yourself. You're going to feel empowered.
I mean, it sounds for both partners who are doing this work, it sounds like freedom.
It is freedom. It's definitely freedom.
Well, I can't wait for people who are resonating with what you're talking about right now, who are saying that sounds like it could be helpful with what I'm walking through right now, to get their hands on it. We're going to make sure to put links in our show notes on how people can connect with your practice, how people can connect with the books that you've written. Use this extremely helpful model to get to the heart of a lot of things that they've been carrying in some cases for decades.
Well, I appreciate that. I think it's important. This model being used throughout the globe in both individual and group settings. And the feedback, we get feedback every day how this has been a game changer.
Well, thinking about what was available when my recovery began in 2009 compared to what's available now, it's something to be so grateful for, that there are people like you and so many people who are putting so much that's helpful out at just to be available for people who are looking for help. So, Eddie, thank you for being who you are, doing what you do, and thank you for spending some time talking with me about it today. I sure do appreciate you.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you. And thank you for the great work that you do also. You're making a big difference in many, many people's lives. So always good to be here with you, my friend.